Welcome, everybody. I'm Chris Mayhews with Western Sustainability Exchange, and we are broadcasting live from White Sulphur Springs, Montana, the Ringling Mansion. We're having our staff retreat right now. I am hosting tonight because Holly called for a vote. She's right here, and I won. So I win the host job tonight, and you have to hear from me, but she's sitting right here, so anything I screw up, she'll be quick to correct. We're happy to have everyone. We really appreciate the list of panelists that we have tonight. Tonight's part one of a two-part session. We're going to be talking about matching your livestock to your grazing system. And so we've got the experience of a lot of different folks here that we've asked to support this call. Tonight, we're going to focus on three operations that have been leaders in the movement to create more opportunities to purchase bulls along these lines. And so the Indreland Ranch of Big Timber and the Veseth Ranch of, I think they call Malta, but they're kind of in the middle of nowhere. I know I've been there and it's not very close to Malta or anything else for that matter. And then we've got Cooper Hibbard from Sebin Livestock. And I know some of the other ranchers that have agreed to join. We appreciate having you here, and we'll want your questions and participation as well, maybe as buyers of these type of bulls. But we'll feature you at the next bull session talking about the female side of the equation. So with that, it's an open conversation. We've got a lot of participants tonight. So either use the little heart emoji at the center of the bottom of your screen to raise your hand, or put something in the chat if you want to use that, or just take yourself off mute and find a place to interrupt if you wish, but that usually doesn't work quite as well. Any other housekeeping items, Mrs. Stoltz?
Yep, sounds great.
Wow, that's the best compliment I've ever gotten from her. So with that, I will put myself on mute and I will turn it over to Roger Indreland, Big Timber, Montana.
Thanks a lot, Chris. And thanks everybody for logging in. I think it's a great forum and appreciate, as a board member of WSE, I just want to put a plug in for WSE as the thought leader in the industry, and really appreciate this opportunity and the discussions that can be had to basically come to a really logical solution. Kudos, and I wish I was there at the retreat with you guys in a way, but probably best I'm not. Anyway, a lot of thanks to everybody involved in making this happen. So appreciate that. Yeah, Betsy and myself, we're in the registered Black Angus seed stock business. And a quick history of that would be that I started with a handful of cows in 1977, and that was a FAY project. So we got a pretty good bout of history, but that was also a time frame when bigger, better, faster was really taking off. And being a kid in high school, I was all about it. We pushed down that road, or I did. The idea was to be the bigger, better, faster mentality. And along about, I don't know, during that quest, probably about the mid 80s, we made a decision to AI to a bull who was a breed leading marbling bull and also a very high milk EPD bull. But EPDs, that was a time when we were just moving from indexes into EPDs as the breed associations were competing for their jockeying for their space. And also during that time was when CA as a brand came out, when certified Angus beef. So at that point, we're going to take the world by storm. And then we inadvertently, very much purposely, identified a bull that was one of the higher marbling bulls in the breed from a pretty reputable breeder with high milk EPDs. And I just couldn't wait to see what that was going to turn out like. And it turns out it had been better to wait, maybe. But anyway, so with that in mind, we AI'd, at that time, we AI'd cows a lot. So probably about half of our calf crop was out of that bull. And I was so excited about those heifer calves, and they looked really nice and they bred up pretty good as yearlings. And along those lines, we've always ran at least a frugal operation. We're not overfeeding. We've always been pretty stingy with resources. So then they calved fine, they did fine, they milked good, they weaned good calves, but the breed up was horrible. And so that was our education, and that's a very costly endeavor. And basically, they'd be lucky if 25% of those heifers bred back as coming 3-year-olds. And we decided we just can't go down that road. But anyway, so that really was an education for us, and what even zeroing in on a couple of traits, how that reflected and what that did, what the opposing cost was. And the reason I chose Angus is there's a little bit of history there. And I'll get through this kind of quick so we can move on and get on a good discussion. But my grandfather was one of the founders of the Montana Angus Association. So my mom and my aunts and uncles mentored. That's how I chose that. So nothing scientific at all about that. But I've had a lot of curiosity through the years as to what other breeds would bring to the table and those kind of things. But we've certainly chosen to stick with the registered Black Angus. And from there, once we recognized that, we turned a corner and started moving towards a forage-based system where we could minimize our winter costs, winter graze, and really try to make better uses of our resources. And we went along those lines until probably about 2000. At that point, we got really serious about taking the costs out of the cows, and then Ranch for Profit in 2012. And shortly after that, met Nicole Masters and started thinking about the other side of the equation, or the forage and soil side of the equation. And so at that point, we were completely committed to moving our cow herd to a forage-based, cheaper wintering kind of animal. And then I guess along the lines, we studied and adopted some of the Johann Zeitzman principles, things like that. But to answer some of the questions, one of the questions here was lots of challenges, because you can always pressure cattle to make them not perform. And I do feel philosophically that's part of the job of the seed stock producer. We need to be hard enough on them to where when they go someplace else, they really think they've hit the jackpot. And sometimes we've probably taken that to extremes and had some cattle fall out that probably wouldn't under most any other programs. I view that philosophically as a part of what we're wanting to do. But the bottom line, basically, the question is, how did those choices impact animal performance? Our weaning weights went down, our cow size went down, our yearling weights went down, but our breed back stayed the same or better, and our bottom line certainly went up. That's the metric we measure things by. Is it paying or not? In a nutshell, that's a quick overview. Hopefully that's just enough to make you really curious and ask a lot of questions. The only other thing, try to focus on our land management. We're looking more at the per acre return rather than the per animal return. So those are some things we look at. But the other thing philosophically, that I always say that to people that are looking at bulls or interested in bulls, and our own worst enemy. Betsy does a phenomenal job with marketing. We put out quite a bit of information. We add on things like some livestock handling and those kind of things that we think are adding value to the cattle so that people can deal with the cattle better. And we want to work with a like-minded community that way. But probably the biggest thing that I want people to do is come look at our cows. And if they don't like what our cows are doing and how we're running our cows, then they certainly shouldn't buy bulls, because that's really where they're headed. I guess that's in a nutshell. And I seriously believe also we line breed, so we keep sires from pretty much within our own raising. Very seldom do we bring in any outside blood. And then we do DNA, so we are identifying the bulls that are the most prolific breeders. But all along those lines, I really seriously feel, and it's a Johann Zeitzman principle as well, but people can raise their bulls that are probably more adapted and better suited for their environment and their management, probably than I can produce. But I think the reality is not very many people want to do that. So I feel that we have a pretty good shot at being in business for a fair while, because I just don't see that going away overnight. But I think long term, if I could propose an ideal situation, it would be that really there's only a handful of seed stock producers, and they'd be in a region, and they wouldn't sell their bulls out of their region necessarily. Those cattle would be adapted and fit that regional program, and they would keep bulls and then basically turn them over to their neighbors, and you get 6, 8, up to 10 years out of a bull, and there wouldn't be near the need for the amount of bulls that are just currently marketed and sold, because they'd last a long time. There wouldn't be feet and leg issues. There's just a plethora of things that wouldn't be, and you wouldn't have this monster seed stock industry. Now, I kind of hope as that, which I still think that will happen at some point, I hope we hang on to a pretty good share of that. That would be my dream, to see there being hardly any need for seed stock producers. I would hope that we'd be one of the last few. That gives you a quick overview of our philosophy and how we go about doing things. But I sure want to leave a lot of time for questions. So I'd turn it over to Dale and see what he's got to say.
Thanks, Roger. I guess I wanted to start tonight by thanking the whole crew at WSE and Roger for we've signed our contract with Native now. And that's in my tenure here at the ranch, that's been the biggest plus for our range management program. Just to have that even in the start here. My hats are off to you guys. I guess I'd start with, I'm the numbers guy, and we live in pretty tough country, and we had some hits in the 80s we didn't think we were going to make through. And how we did that was reducing our cost, getting out of farming, and letting the cows do all the work. And so that was how I got here. I didn't start out to raise bulls at all. I had an interest in genetics, so I went through the university system, and everybody else did a certain amount of AIing and stuff. But I guess originally I was disgusted with the establishment in getting, if I found good bulls out there, that they wouldn't last. And so I said, heck, I can just breed my own. And about that time, we've always Hereford cattle in the 70s. In the 80s, when I showed up, we started doing some crossbreeding through graduate school. I got out in 90, and there was a break in there. We didn't think that pre-1990 that you could maintain hybrid vigor within your cows with crossbreeding. And they did a pretty good test down at Play Center in Nebraska at the germplasm evaluation. And what they found was it depended on how many breeds you incorporated. But if you ended up getting enough breeds into your mix, the magic number is 5, that you would see no regression in or any loss in your heterosis, your hybrid vigor. Most of the numbers that come out, the only number I really worry about is lifetime production. And that's a pretty high number in a crossbred cow. That's up around 30 to 33%. And that's over the average of their straight bred contemporary groups. So that's all the parents that put those together. And I got to messing around in the 90s and saved a lot of my own bulls, kept AIing, have kept on. I probably made a mistake early. I selected red cattle. If you're trying to sell seed stock, that's probably not the best business to be in right there. But I'm glad I did. I thought there was a couple of things that I liked better. I thought the real value for me in red cattle was that I could get my inputs a lot cheaper. And so I know picking up cattle or picking up my bulls, that if I had been at the very best Angus bulls, I could never afford that. And so today, fast forward, since the mid 90s, we've AI'd 8,500 cows, and I use quite a component of my own sires. I think out of 15 bulls last year, most of what I have used, I usually try to use 4 or 5, about a third of them as outside AI sires. And we're just going through the process right now with IGS, International Genetic Solutions. I do most of my work with Data Genie, and she's worked with Simmental for years. And so this is my second year in EPDs. And I guess I've had some disappointments and surprises of what I've liked, didn't like. I think it's a very good process, and I've done a lot of experimenting in my life with just about everything. And I'd like to I think one of my better experiments has been the composite cattle. Guess with the numbers, we've tried to go through and document or work on every aspect. Most of the time, I guess, on our running conditions, we're in a dry desert area and the Missouri River breaks, north of the Missouri River breaks, and a 12-inch rainfall. But the problem with us is we vary so much. We can have a 6-inch year or we can have an 18-inch year. The 6-inch year is pretty hard to look like you're a good manager. The 18-inch year, most everybody's a good manager. Like Roger's comment on milk, I guess one of my surprises, I've always been for moderate milk production because my theory is that if I go too high to milk, I lose all those high milking cows the next drought due to not rebreeding. And it's just been amazing looking at all my milk EPDs on these bulls the last 2 years. I don't think I have anything over 25 in my herd. Running right from 20 to somewhere in the low 20s there. And I just know for the guys that are in AI these days, it's awfully hard to find a bull with that low of milk that's in any of your big A units. Guess with that, I'll turn it over to the next guy. I guess my line of bullshit is nearly run out. So I'll give you guys a break. Thanks.
Dale, I wanted to thank you for joining us tonight. If your voice is any indication, it sounds like you're battling through a cold, so thanks for getting it out and being with us.
I'm actually doing very well here tonight. This was quite an improvement. So
Good.
I called it the kick-ass crud because that's what it did. So
All right, Cooper in the dark, are you with us?
I'm with you. Yeah,
All right. Turn it over to you.
sounds good. Thank you, Chris. Thanks to everyone for having me here. Chris, I apologize in advance for that guy over your left shoulder. And I've also, yeah, that guy, man, can everyone just admire him for a little bit?
I think
That's my brother. That's my brother, by the way, just ribbing him.
Good to see it,
And
Daryl.
I'm informed that this black screen thing I've got going on right here is creepy, is what someone called me earlier. So I apologize.
just show us a
Hold
little
over on
bit of your face, Cooper.
Does it?
Just come forward just a little bit. Let's see if we can see your face just a little bit. There's the creepy factor. Oh yeah, there we go.
Man. Yeah, I do feel creepy when I do that. Hold over from the side of the road. My call did get dropped once already, but hopefully this holds. It's great to hear Roger and Dale, both of your histories. I have not heard that. I appreciate you guys sharing that. Coming at it from a little different standpoint, we're strictly a commercial operation, and how we got started raising bulls, I guess from my viewpoint, I felt like it was a necessity. It probably wasn't a necessity, but I truly felt like it was a necessity, and it resulted from our search and progression and what is the best grazing management and what's the best grazing fit for us, and specifically for addressing our winter grazing zone, which is really our bottleneck for how many cattle we could run. We really became hyper-focused in our winter zone and how could we graze our cattle better. And for context for that, or throughout all of this time that this was going on, our calving date was June 10th. So our cows are in their second and third trimester throughout the entire winter. And our winter zone was our bottleneck. And so we really started pushing the envelope with winter grazings in our winter zone. And we made some breakthroughs that were pretty promising and pretty telling. That was the way to graze and move forward, which is non-selective grazing, which we do when it fits for us. And the best fit so far is in the winter. But after discovering that and running the numbers on that and knowing that the grazing non-selectively was what we had to do in order to advance the ranch forward towards the next generation. But it seemed like we'd gotten to a point where our grazing management had outpaced our genetics. We needed a different type of cattle. And up to that point, we'd been much like Dale. My uncle Chase was wise enough. He was exposed to the science behind composite genetics and the inherent benefits that you get from running composite cattle. And so he'd been bringing on black composite bulls since about 2006. And a majority of our bull battery were composites at the time, and some Black Angus. And so then I looked at, okay, what are the weaknesses within our cow herd? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? What would make our cow herd better in order to address this grazing problem? And then went out to try and find a breed that addressed most all of those weaknesses that we listed down on basically a balance sheet of strengths and weaknesses. And found a breed called Obrock that really addressed all the weaknesses. And I then actually went to the composite breeders that we were sourcing bulls from to see if they were open to incorporating these Obrock genetics as their next breed influence, and they were not. And so it just took matters into our own hands, and I bought a old retired Obrock sire from a guy who used to be an Obrock breeder just outside of Hall there. And so we brought him. He was like 6 years old at the time, and thinking of, okay, how do we structure a breeding program that selects for the best genetics and try and leave the human bias out of the equation and allow Mother Nature to do the selecting. And what we came up with was taking that Obrock bull and putting him in early in our calving first calf heifers. So first calf heifers start calving into May. We dropped that bull in June 25th and left him in for 30 days, pulled him at the end of July, and then the remaining bull battery went in that third week of August. So there's a 3-week break between that Obrock bull and then the rest of the bull battery. And what happened with dropping that bull in early, that bull would go around and breed the most fertile heifers from that peer group. They would conceive to calve in April. Those calves would drop in April, and then we'd leave them intact and they'd become our bull. And that's how we started our own composite program, was infusing this breed on top of the composites that we'd already been breeding for. And that was one way that we started selecting bulls. The other way was we just go out into our cow herd and the first cycle of calving, and our criteria was that those cows needed to be 6 years old or older. We kicked that number around. Where we landed at 6 years old was just that we felt that cow had proven herself. I've had some people argue that even a 4-year-old has proven herself and that you can go as low as 4, but we arbitrarily picked 6. So 6 years old and older, calving in the first cycle, body condition 6 or better, good feet, good udders, moderate frame size. We didn't really care what the calf looked like. If it was a bull, then it got a tag in its ear that would make sure that it would stay intact at calving. So those are the 2 ways that we started selecting bulls. This would have been back in 20 that we started this. And then since then, we kept putting bulls in early in our calving first calf heifers. That program's worked really well. And that makes up a majority of our bull battery to this present day, are those out of what we call our elite cows, the ones that conceive early. And it's developed, and we're into what I'm calling phase 3 of developing our own composite. So phase 1 was bringing in an outside breed, the Obrock. Phase 2 was stacking composites on top of composites. So quarter blood Obrock bulls on top of the composite heifers, which some of that science that Meat Animal Research Center saw was the more breeds that you get, and when you do stack those composites, the tighter the bell curve gets for genetic expression. So the more uniform the calf crop. So that's that phase 2 is stacking composites on top of composites. And then phase 3 would be bringing in another outside breed, which we did this last summer, really small experiment with a breed from South Africa called Drakensberger, and AI'd Drakensberger to some of our quarter blood Obrock heifers to start that phase 3 program. Oh, another thing that we just started doing that's new is we started doing some genomic testing on our composite bulls. I'm gaining some confidence with it. I was a little hesitant at first to see how accurate it truly would be, since, well, all the bulls that we're testing had at least some Obrock genetics in them, and Obrocks do not have any EPDs whatsoever, so there isn't any genomic database, if I'm thinking of it correctly, for them to really reference. But it seemed pretty informative. We're treating it as just another tool, but it was interesting to comb through those results. So that's something we're going to start using to a little bit wider degree moving forward. Some things that I regret, I wouldn't even say I would regret. It's just we kept more bulls intact on the front end in those first few years and didn't cull as deeply as we transitioned into culling. And that was just more from my own learning experience to see how these guys would grow out. But now that I say that, this last year, I think last year's bull crop, so last spring, which is when we process all the yearlings, I don't think we pulled very many out of that one. And that was my main takeaway from those phase twos was in those phase ones with those quarter bloods, that bell curve was quite a bit broader. You get some leggy bulls and you get some nice squat bulls, and there was certainly a variety. And then my observation on those phase twos when it came time to work them last spring was you're taking them down the alleyway and it's just like they're all cookie cutters. It's pretty neat to see that science. Maybe that was a fluke, but my interpretation was that science was really holding true on what they were saying out of that Meat Animal Research Center, that bell curve would really tighten up. So yeah, it's just been a real learning curve and pretty exciting. And I think about over 90% of our current bull battery is all home raised right now. And that's all I got, Chris, wherever you want to go from here.
Yeah, thank you, guys. A couple loose ends I wanted to tie up here. That there's a book that was referred to by a couple of you, Man, Cattle, and Veld by Johann Zeitzman. So I wanted to make sure that I was clear about that. And then Cooper, you referred to a meat study. Can you give us a little bit more information about that so people can look it up, or we can look it up and then provide it later on?
Yeah, that Man Cattle Veld has probably had the biggest impact on me from a ranching standpoint than any other book from ranch management standpoint, aside from holistic management. But the actual implementation and a lot of the ideas that I just shared with you were influenced by that book. So I would underscore Man, Cattle, and Veld. There is really good science that Meat Animal Research Center out of Clay Center, Nebraska came out with, and I believe it was the late 80s. And that's the same science that Dale referenced and what got him intrigued with composites. And the science in a nutshell, so an F1 cross is 100% heterosis. So your black baldies have 100% heterosis for hybrid vigor. The problem with that F1 cross is when that black baldy becomes a cow and has a calf, then that calf only has 50% heterosis. So it's diluted in half with each consecutive generation. And when you lock down, as Dale said, the magic number is 5. You need at least 5 breeds under the same hide. When you lock that down, then you get that 83 to 88% heterosis effect locked in that does not get diluted from one generation to the next. And that was all proven in the 80s. And it's wild to me that it's hard to find true composite cattle nearly 40 years later. But great studies.
Dale or Cooper, do you happen to know the principal investigator or another reference we could look up to provide that for folks?
I guess I'd just go Germplasm Evaluation Project, and I think they called it the HRSCA. It'd be an ARS center out of Clay Center, Nebraska. They run about 5,000 cows, and they've done most of the comparative breed work, or the best stuff out there anyway. I've got some old handouts here, but I think I haven't looked them up lately, but I think you can probably find them on the internet.
Okay, I think we found it. We'll send that out to everybody as a follow-up. Thank you, guys. I'll just open it up now. Dale, Roger, if you have any follow-up comments, or there's no questions in the chat yet, nobody has their hand raised, but I'll just open it up to, and as I said, Brian Dawson, Bryan Mannix, Rocco, Trevor Smith, if you're on, or anybody else who we'd ask to participate in this, if you'd like to jump in and maybe give some of your experience on bull buying or selection, we'd be happy to hear from you. So I'll open it up.
I guess I'd go back to a point that Roger made, that I think it's important for people to source cattle within their same environments. Taking cattle out of the Midwest to the Great Basin, some stuff like that, looks like it's a fairly risky ordeal. If you can find a ranch that runs cattle in your type of environment, I would certainly recommend that.
I might jump in with a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So this would be to everybody is, I think we all feel like generally the cows have gotten way too big for our environment. So what is the cow size we can be looking to, and what's the bottom end on how small we could go? Because it just seems a way smaller cow works better for us, but then we've got to sell the calves. And I guess I'd be interested in everybody's input on what they think, what size cow we should be shooting for.
I guess I'd start with, I think that's a very good question. I saw an article in Drovers here. They figure since 1978, cow size has increased 7 pounds a year. And anytime you select for growth, that's highly correlated to mature size. So you select for big growthy critters. We talk about the 1,100-pound cow, and most of them don't weigh that these days. I guess how we try to combat that, we have variation in our cows. Everything is weighed once a year: cows, calves, bulls, yearlings, and we try to break down. I'll have a little chart in my book here. We try to break down everything, not only what they weighed and their body condition score, but how they rebred. And there seems to be some real correlations. If your young cows are thin, a lot of times they don't rebreed very well, and how we can get around those things. I guess on the ranch here, we try to keep the cow at about a 5 body condition score year round. We test them in the fall at preg test time in October, and that should be their low point because that's right when we pull the calves off. And then we tried to feed those up. We tried to put a half a condition score or a full condition score on those cows before calving to try to help them rebreed.
I think it really depends on your management and your locality and where you're at, but at the end of the day, it comes down to what your management allows and what winter feed costs may be or may not be, and how available it is or how predictable it is. Because at the end of the day, it comes back to an economic equation, and you may be set up to do one thing, but you could have a neighbor right across the fence who's set up to do a different thing. And depending on when they calve and all those things and how they're balancing their overall management, I do think there's certainly a sweet spot probably for everybody individually. But I think I understand the question, Steve. It is that there's a little bit of a, maybe 700-pound cows is too small. Maybe the industry really won't accept them. And maybe the industry wouldn't accept the progeny either. That's probably the extreme, but we pretty well also know that 1,500 pounds is big. And of course, a couple 100 pounds of that could purely be body condition. I guess it's really, I'm not answering the question specifically because I don't know that it can be answered across the board. I think everybody has to decide that in their own operation, what cattle are working and which ones aren't, and then try to keep more of the kind that are working.
Can I weigh in here just real quickly?
Absolutely.
Roger. Yeah, I just had a thought. This is Rocco. I don't know if I'm coming up or anything, but we've struggled for years to keep cow size down. It's a tough thing. And sometimes I wonder if we're worried about the wrong thing. Our cow size is going to range from, say, frame score 3.5 to 5. 5, I don't like to look at. But sometimes I wonder, well, maybe we should just run those cows, and the ones that thrive under our management and our conditions is what we should have. Maybe we've got some high 4, maybe a frame score 5 cows that I might not like to look at them, but the reason they're still there is because they breed up and they're in good shape. So what's wrong with that? And we have some 3.5 frame score cows that the only reason they're there is because they're a dang 3.5 frame score, and I've got it in my head that's what I want. Maybe we should manage them however we are going to manage our cow herd, however that might be. Personally, we would like to put as minimal inputs as we can, but we're still looking for not a cow that survives, but a cow that actually thrives, if that makes sense. We're looking for a cow that thrives within our environment, our management system, raises us an average calf, does nothing special out of the ordinary there, but keeps them weight on year round with minimal inputs, and keep struggling with this whole individual versus population thing. If you get what I mean, I would like to deal more with populations of animals than individuals. You look at the danged elk, they all look the same. you look at the deer, they all look the same. And you look at cattle, and man, they're everything you can want. I would like to find populations of cattle to select from, and I think the size would take care of itself if we did that long enough. I don't know. I was throwing that out there to see if other people had the same experience, that they've got all different size cattle that function well, but we don't like it because they don't look uniform. Is that, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, thank you, Rocco. Bryan Mannix, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I think what these guys said is great and spot on. I just wanted to share some things from our experience. I don't have an answer to the question, but we deal in both direct to consumer and commodity markets. And we did get some pushback a few years ago in the direct to consumer world and retail, that were grocery stores we were selling to, on some smaller cattle that we were trying out. And the size of the steaks was an issue for some of the restaurants. And it was surprising to us because we figured you could just move more product. But the presentation of that product to the customer ended up mattering quite a bit more than we anticipated. So we've been pushing back a little bit the other way, mostly because of that feedback from our customers on the direct to consumer and retail side. Just something to think about.
Yeah, good. Bart?
I was just gonna support what Bryan said, and where it changed for us, because we're direct to consumer, is every year since we've been doing this, our cows have just gotten smaller. And where we really don't weigh our cows live weight ever, it's all hanging carcass weight. And so our hanging carcass weights have gotten smaller and smaller, which means our sweet spot for us in our best margin per animal is going to be between that 650 and 700 pounds. We left that behind about 3 years ago. We're not at that sweet spot anymore, and we're going the other direction. The other thing is these smaller animals don't yield as well as the larger animals, meaning from their hanging carcass weight to the cut and wrapped. And when you're in the beef business, that all starts to hit you economically. So like what Roger was talking about, it depends on what you're doing. And what we've started to do is we started to retain heifers and bulls out of our larger animals, to because we haven't seen the drop in size change at all. It just continues down. So
Thank you, Bart. Dan Sanders, go ahead.
Yeah, and relating to that, for Bart and Bryan, sounds like anybody else that sells direct to consumer, what are you guys seeing on your bull selection in relation to flavor and marbling, that type of thing? Obviously, it's not just raising the meat, it's making it something that people want to eat too, that maybe commercial side doesn't have to worry about as much.
we select strictly on beef, because on every package of beef we raise, there's a lot number on there. And the first number is their ear tag, and the second number is their hanging carcass weight. And we keep track of that data and how we select what bulls or heifers we're going to retain. And so far, it's been helping in selecting that. We have other criteria that we select amongst as well, but that's a critical component of it.
Yeah, I'm not sure I fully understood your question, but I'll try to answer it based off of how Bart answered. I definitely pay attention to that if I'm selecting outside bulls, but probably 90% of our bulls are home raised as well. And I'm a little bit more maternal focused. We still sell a lot of animals through the commodity world, but I'm trying to find things that'll work on the mother end in our management system. And then if we start to see pushback, trying to address that pushback while at the same time just monitoring the marbling carcasses, like what's working well. But I would say most of my bull picking, that's not my top priority, I guess. It is in a sense of like body condition cows when they're calving is when I'm picking those bulls. A lot of them starting to dip into the genetic testing on our bulls. Started last year, going to continue to do that. So it's definitely a factor, but I would say it's not my main factor currently. I would just say that we're trying to live in two different worlds a little bit, but at the end of the day, we're trying to find cows that work under our management and our environment. And that needs to be able to fatten up on grass and provide a good, high quality product, while also hopefully that product still works in the feedlot. And so far, we've been able to walk that line economically, being successful in doing that. Yeah, that's all I got for now.
Yeah, that's a lot of it. I guess what I'm trying to get at is, do you think the bulls you're selecting drive the flavor, or is it more your management that's driving the flavor for your end product for what you keep and feed out yourself?
Flavor's driven by their environment, in my opinion, and tenderness, which is a huge component, is strictly genetics from what I've experienced and what people are saying.
Yeah, I don't think I disagree with Bart on that.
Yeah, I'd chime in. I'd agree with those thoughts. We did a branded beef business for a little while, so really focused on that as well. But when you start thinking about those things, over time from the 1950s and 60s, we had what everybody refers to as belt buckle cattle. Then we went through a just taller is better through the 70s and early 80s. Then EPDs came out and everybody started chasing EPDs. And now basically, not to knock genetic testing, but basically genetic testing is another tool developed by another sideline in the industry that's basically using EPDs in the same, for the most part, the metrics that they're using are based off of the same metrics that they started using for EPDs. And then now we're starting to zero in on what is the functional animal that gets us to and then along the way, we also included carcass ultrasound. There's a couple of different technologies you can use for that. And we chose one that's a shoot side data, so we can actually compare that to just within our herd. And so that to me is a little more meaningful, and is a way to look under the hide without killing them. It's fairly accurate. But I guess in a nutshell, what I'm saying is from the 1950s to 2020, we're 75 years into this, and we still don't know really where we're headed. And so at the end of the day, we individually just have to pick what we think works. It's not bad to use tools because I think it can steer your direction one way or another. But at the end of the day, just making the cattle work in your environment to meet your end need is very important. But I wouldn't take away from the marbling. And I know a line of cows that we have when we were doing the branded beef business, those cattle were always tender. They were always finished a little bit ahead of what the external fat we were seeing. And always when we would ultrasound them, those cattle with that lineage were finished, whether we thought they were or not. And that really speaks to Bart's comment. Yeah, I think the cattle don't know what we're asking of them. And I think that's where we need to try to get some consistency. And when you look at natural systems, how many years that selection has gone into to create a herd of elk that looks the same, or to create a herd of deer that looks the same. And I'm just not sure that maybe we don't, maybe the biggest struggle we have is finding that discipline to stay the course and just pick something. But economic conditions change, so maybe it does change. I really think that $5,000 pickups and 80-cent diesel fuel versus what we have today changes the equation. So economics do need to change and shift, and we just need to adapt as we go.
We had a couple questions come up in the chat here. One of them refers to the line breeding concept. It says, how tight are you monitoring the line breeding, and are you concerned about sons breeding mothers? Anybody want to take that one?
I guess I would. We probably line breed or inbreed as much as anybody. And our experience is, yeah, we haven't done it on purpose, but we've certainly had sons breed their mothers. We've had full brothers for matings thing. It's actually one way to discover genetic defects. The industry, at least the Black Angus industry, had a lot of genetic defects in the past 10 plus years. And there was a lot of testing went on. The old protocol was to breed a bull back to 35 of their daughters. And then this could show no genetic defects. And I've asked the current geneticists if that's still meaningful, because we know so much more now about with DNA tracking and mapping the genomic sequences or whole genomic pool. But the geneticists today are saying that still is a golden standard, is that if you can breed a bull back to 35 of his own daughters and have those pregnancies go to term and calve and be born without any abnormalities, that's still the gold standard. So I think it's a little bit overrated as far as the granted, like when you're going to composites, you're going the other direction. And I believe in that. But we chose to concentrate our genetic in that's a result of our management and reason in our area. So we chose to concentrate that genetics in hopes that we would narrow that gene pool so that we'd increase the consistency of the progeny. And genetically, that's how you see a herd of deer or elk that looks all the same. So that's the path we have chosen that way. So I guess I'm not afraid of it because we've experienced quite a bit of inbreeding, line breeding. And when we're using DNA to identify the sires, we just turn bulls out. And those bulls that breed the most cows, they're identified as the most virile, and the bull that is doing the most work. There's inbreeding happening there that we don't control. We're willing to let that be a little more like a natural system.
Any other comments on that particular subject? If not, we'll go to Jim, who's got a live question, and then I'll go back to the chat. Jim, are you off mute?
Yeah, I am now. How is everybody? I don't know if I have a question or not, but I do want to comment to Rocco's statement about it. It's more, especially for ranchers out west here, it's more about a population genetic pool than it is a specific bull. Because as soon as you focus in on 2, 3, 4, 10 bulls, you're gonna get away from some of that. So I try and keep my selection criteria and stuff pretty simple. They got to bring me a calf. It's got to be within the bell curve of the calves of the rest of the calves. So I agree with that, but I think one problem is that we get in a pinch here, especially here at the Fort Diamond. We're looking at going into direct to consumer, and other guys have mentioned it. Is there's a gap there between what consumers want and what we as ranchers need for productive cattle. And I don't know if I'd love to hear everybody's comments on it. How do you bridge that gap? Because when cattle first came out west here, they were low input cattle. They turned them out, they gathered what was old enough, sent them out to Chicago where they were fed or whatever. And here we didn't care about it. It was just whatever cows brought me a calf. But people have a expectation for tenderness and flavor and all that now, that maybe the best cow out west here is not going to deliver that for the consumer. And so how do we fix that? Either we got to chase certain genetic traits, or we got to change the consumer's flavor. And I don't know, it's frustrating because even my employer, we talked about bringing Wagyu influence in. And I said, if we start crossbreeding everything Wagyu, they aren't going to be the most productive for this system, especially the 10 years we've spent developing the cattle we have. And I said, if you could take Wagyu, and if you spent long enough out west here, you could get a productive Wagyu, but he'd probably look a lot like the productive Angus that I have now, which may not be what consumers really want. So I was just wondering how you guys think about that and how we can bridge that gap, because it just seems like it's always the rabbit hole that you go chasing down because you have one trait. And I always go back to my upbringing in the dairy industry. The Holsteins were selected for one trait for god awful generations, and it made it probably in the most economical cow now. But anyway, I'll rambled on, but I just wanted to hear anybody's comments or thoughts about how we bring those two opposing points together.
I'd love it if Bart would weigh in on that, because that's what he does. He's trying to, I don't know what he does, but I've just visited a little bit, and it seems like of everyone here, he's trying to get a cow to survive like the rest of us, but he's direct marketing and doing a pretty good job of it. So I'd love to hear him answer that.
I don't know what I'm doing, Rocco, so that makes two of us, but we are trying to do exactly what you're saying. And I mean, what you're talking about, Rocco, is environmental selection, whereas what I'm letting play into it is economic selection, the best piece of beef I can sell. And so what we've done is we have a small enough herd and all that we can get really particular on the beef, and we pay attention to every piece of beef that comes through. And really the most critical component of selling beef, in my opinion, is tenderness. And you can feed it into them, or you can genetically have it. Wagyu, you have to feed it into them. We have a small herd of Wagyu. They're the exact opposite animal that I would want or any other rancher would want in the West to survive. They perform horrible because as a animal that is going to turn over and be the most efficient animal, we have to keep them an extra year to grass finish them to even get them to where they're finished. And they're about the size of a saddle horse. They have growth, and carcass is their supports exactly what they are. And we've tried one lean. They're the toughest thing on planet Earth to eat and the most horrible beef. But if you let them marble, they're phenomenal tender and they're delicious. And to be honest with you, they've marketed the hell out of them, so we can charge astronomical amounts of money for them to make up for that extra year we have to keep them. So we keep that herd around because economically it makes sense. They're ugly. What we want for an animal that will stay in our herd and do what I did is I copy what Cooper's done with his herd on his selection of age 6 mature cow. I figure she's been around long enough. She calved in the first cycle. She's raised a calf every single year. She's got good feet, udder, all that. And then the next critical component for us is how has her offspring's beef performed for us? And we keep track of that. And some of these cows it's really interesting. What we're finding out is like your most efficient, there's two things that are happening for us is your most efficient cows, their offspring will marble the quickest as well. So they fit really well. The other thing is they're usually early maturing animals, those ones that'll cycle in that. And that's what we really saw with our steer calves. Like when we had steer calves that were growth genetics and that they were just like these Wagyus. They just keep in, we process everything around 24 months. We don't put any grains in them. It's all grass finished. And at 24 months, they would not finish. And in fact, they would hardly finish by 36 months. And they just grew and they were like saddle horse size by the time they would finish. But the early maturing, we've finally gotten in the last 3 years where these steers are starting to finish at 24 months. The heifers all finish 24 months. They just have those hormones going and that. They're not all even. But anyway, that's the two biggest things we've seen. And those are the type of cows that are staying in our herd, are early maturing and efficient, and they're producing really good beef. So I think they both can be there. With that said, we are the world's best at inconsistency and in our beef, because we'd have to raise thousands of beef cows just to get the consistency for the consumer. So our consumers are really tolerant of inconsistency. The other thing, and I saw somebody wrote this in there, is there's a gene called the tenet gene, which is the gene for tenderness. And this is maybe a huge game changer for us. We just went through the testing on all of our bulls and a bunch of our top cows in there. And what they're finding, I've spent a lot of time talking to the guy that found this gene and how he went about finding it. He's worked on it for 16 years, and then they've been trialing it the last 6 years, I believe. And we were lucky enough that a lot of the genetics we chose and the animals we chose carry this gene. And we just got the highest percentage of tenet positive animals that he's tested in our little bunch that we sent in. And what, from the conversation with him and everything, is what we found is that these more moderate frame, more efficient, smaller animals are more carriers of the tenet gene. Whereas they tested all the ABS and select sire animals or bulls in there, and only 2% of them came back with this positive gene. Ours just came back 70%. They hadn't seen that high of a number. But anyway, so I think there is a correlation there. I think the science is starting to catch up with it. That will help take us down that road to confirm it and that. And the lucky thing for us is, like, we produce some pretty lean beef and we just have to process them because we can't take them any longer. But some of that really lean beef will be super tender. And I've always believed it was 100% genetics that makes that happen, because I've had other beef that's been pretty marbled up that we've raised, and it's genetic lines and it's tougher than heck. And so we've gotten rid of those genetic lines. But anyways, I'm just rambling and carrying on there, but I don't know if that helps or not.
No, that helped a lot, Bert. Thank you.
Bryan, I'd also be curious if you have a perspective on that with all of you guys' experience with your beef. But Bryan Mannix and Brian Dawson too, don't be afraid to chime in here if you have something to add.
Yeah, I don't have much more to add to Bart's. I guess I would just second the brothers 20 years ago started downsizing their herd after going to ranching for profit to try to get a more efficient cow that was more economical. Basically, what everybody said here tonight, right? One that has less expenses put into her, and at that same time, they thought that animal also would finish on grass and could be a niche market for us to get into. So I do think that world does exist, and that's the route we've gone. We haven't got as far as tenant testing. I know the steaks that I've had off of our own place, I've noticed a difference in each one. We haven't gone as far as to track that as hard, but a lot of times your more efficient cows, their offsprings, or even them themselves, when they fall out, we have a burger cow program. They're going to marble up pretty well and finish well sooner than everything else. She's usually the cow that stays in the herd longer too, or she's a cow that comes off the mountain in November in better body condition than her peers. So that more efficient cow does work in that direct to consumer program. That's what we found. And yeah, I don't know if I have much more to add to that, but I would just second what I said earlier of the experience that I had. Tried some low lines on some heifers and those offspring. That's where we got into things that were just too small because we were already a pretty moderate herd. And then when we crossed some low lines on them, those steaks were just too small for the consumer. So it is possible in our experience anyway to go too far that way, even though those cows probably would have done fine under our management. That product did not move well. So we have to be aware in our herd anyway of getting too far and too small. But we've been addressing that similar to what Bart is. Just we used to pick off the smaller end of our herd when we were downsizing. And now when we're picking replacement heifers or bulls, that's a little bit of the opposite. We're picking either middle of the road or the upper end. And that's how I'm currently addressing that. And if I do buy outside bulls, I'm paying attention to their frame size, of what they are and what they're expected to be.
Hey, Dusty, I'll circle back to you really quick. Did we cover your question? Did you have any follow-ups about the tenant testing? It shows you're on mute, so I don't know.
There,
we
I
go.
got off, I think. Found the right spot. Yeah, it's new to me, but I would just wonder if there could be any negative consequences or if it would be something that would be worthwhile to, especially if you're raising your own bulls, is just to only keep ones with tenant positive. But are there any negatives to it, does anyone think, or is it too new to know that yet? I've had unintended consequences bite me before, and I was just wondering if there was a reason not to get overly excited about it.
The reason I'm interested in it is because what all these smart guys that have raised all the bulls that I buy and have made my herd out of, that I've learned from, is if you chase one thing, whether it's carcass or milk or whatever, you chase it, you're going to give something else up in the cow. And that middle of the road cow seems to do the best, and everybody has their little niche in there. But this is my understanding, and I may not be accurate on this, but like most genetic testing or EPDs that you're looking at is data that's collected over time. There's human error involved with it. There's personal bias. There's environmental biases all involved in it. And you can get fads and all that, and you can go after it. And what you do is you usually end up in a place you probably don't want to be in, would be my guess. But the thing about the tenant gene is it's a gene, and it's a highly hereditable gene. It's homozygous dominant. And what they found is its highest occurrence is in these usually moderate, early maturing, the road cows. Not if you're looking for high production or growth or that, you're not going to find the gene in it. And the reason I'm interested in it is because I feel like I can stay with what Rocco's talking about, or that you can chase the animals in your herd that meet your environment and fit what you want. And you can test them for this gene. If they have the gene, then you can really promote that it's in animals that fit your criteria, but it's just a gene in there. You're not chasing a milk production or anything like that, or what tenderness, the genomic tenderness, it's a scale of 1 to 9. This is either they have it or don't. So it's really simple in the way I think, and it's really simple to have it and chase what you want in your herd, in my opinion, than the rest, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I was excited about it, but I was just wondering if there'd be any negatives to it, but probably not.
There probably will be, and hopefully I'm gone before I figure it out.
Yeah, we talked about, Bart, the first time you being wrong just before we started the call, so we hope that's the last time. I also hope your wife's listening so we can get you some good points there. Anybody else want to chime in on the thoughts about tenant testing? And we'll look up some more information on it. Maybe some of you have never heard of that before, and maybe some of you have, but we'll try to provide some more links to that when we send this out later.
Thanks.
I've got one more question, if that's okay for Bart. Bart, you were talking your cow size is getting smaller based on selection for meat quality. If I take it, what is your cow size at a body condition 5 or something like that, roughly? What do your cows weigh?
I honestly don't know. We never weigh them live. I only know what their hanging carcass weights are, which I can, based on hanging carcass weight, that conversion, they're usually in that 1,200 pound based on that conversion. And we got everything, Rocco. I got big ones, I got little ones, everything. It's just, it seems like our calves are getting more symmetrical the more we do this. And that's what we're really seeing is drop our hanging carcass weight down. We still have our mama herd is big, little, intermediate, etc.
Thanks.
Yeah, and thanks for that, Rocco. I think that might be a good question for Dale and Roger and Cooper, if you're still with us. We didn't want to focus tonight on the bull side of the equation, but maybe you could tell us, and I know, Dale, you said that you do a lot of weighing, and Roger, you probably do too. What have you guys seen over the last 20, 30 years running cattle across the scales in terms of your just live weight? How has that trended?
This is Dale, and I guess I can go through the numbers. Our average cow weighs 1,160 pounds. It's actually gone down, but we've been selecting for that too. We're trying to maintain a level of performance and get our cows to mature and flesh easier and size down. There again, I have to say, if you look through our numbers, we have about 400 pounds of difference between our 2-year-old cows and big mother cows, and that's they're in the bunch till they're 11, and then they're mandatory sold. And so I have my 5s to 11s in one bunch, and some of those groups will be over 1,300 pounds. I think my 2-year-olds, when they come in with their first calf, are under 1,000. They'd be in that 70 weight, something like that, if I can remember right. There is some variation there just in cow age, but we have been able to reduce our cow size some just by paying attention to it.
Yeah, I think, Dale, we would be almost exactly the same as that. It's our cow weights are going to be right at that 11 to 11 and a half. The young cows are going to be substantially less. And no, I couldn't agree more. And the same thing, we've consciously tried to bring the thought that the cows should come down a little bit in size and weight. With that said, though, it seems like we can even sell 4-year-old cows and now 5-year-old cows, and they'll go someplace else that feeds quite a bit, and they'll at least gain a half a body condition score as a 5-year-old cow. It really does make a difference on how good your environment is and how tough you are on it. And it's one of the things, because I think most everybody here is pretty aware of their land, really prioritizing their land conditions and soil health, things like that. And it depends on how you're doing your grazing, but you can be cell grazing cattle and doing a lot of good for the land and really not doing well for your cattle at all. And those two don't always line up. And so I think that's probably the goal, is to get those to line up. But by the same token, we're always going to be able to do better in our moving our cattle and our land management. And so I see everything as constantly striving to strike that balance. What's best for the cattle and what's best for the land, and what the balance is between the two. But the pure set stock grazing scenario, where you can turn a bunch of cattle out and they get to pick and choose all summer, that's pretty good for cattle. That's as soon as you start concentrating cattle a little more, maybe making them utilize a little more, and especially the opportunity through the winter to really increase that utilization and put pressure on the cattle, is you can really ramp the pressure up if you want during that time of year on a cow herd. Obviously, finishing cattle, you better not do that, or it's going to cost you another year, right, in getting them to grow out and finish. But I see it as constantly trying to strike that balance. And there again, it depends a lot on your base resource and what your labor resource and all those things. But overall, the darn cattle are pretty darn resilient. And if we just put some parameters around it and they're happy to wait and see what happens, they will gravitate towards the center and that balance. But that takes time. It's a generational thing.
So before we wrap up completely, I want to give Holly just a minute to Ed Cooper. I'll call on you as soon as Holly's done. Is that okay?
Fine with me.
All right. She's been over here chewing on my ear for a minute. My turn. So she has a little totally selfish advertisement for a great workshop that we have coming up this summer. Holly, go.
Yes. So if any of you read the newsletter, like came out like last week, there's a great opportunity. It's called the KLR Marketing School, and it's Graham Reese. He's from Australia. Ranching for Profit had him last year do a class in Wyoming, and it sold out within 2 weeks. And so we had the opportunity to bring him back this summer, June 24th through the 26th in Helena. And his whole concept was first started with Bud Williams, and then he took it back to Australia and added to it. And so he's got 5 principles of this marketing sell-buy program. And it doesn't matter if you have a cow-calf operation, or if you're trading yearlings, stockers, whatever, it works for all of it. And he incorporates your grass, the money, and the livestock. So it's not just the animal. So I would highly recommend anybody that wants to get in on that there's a link in the newsletter. And if you are interested and you can't find it, let me know and I'll send you the link to register for that. That's all I have.
All right. If Holly's happy, we're all happy. Cooper, from the depths of the tunnel in the dark,
The abyss.
put a bow on this sucker.
So the only, no pressure. Thanks, Chris. The only times we weigh our cattle is when we sell them. And they certainly have gone down in size in the last 12 years. This year, I think our opens averaged around 1,170 pounds or so. And then our summer dries, I know the body condition scale only goes to about 9. These were about a body condition 11. They weighed 1,500 pounds this year, which is the heaviest we've had. But going back to Steve Charter's question earlier, there is a lot of science on the efficiency of cow size or the inefficiency of cow size, and how going from, I think there's a few studies done, going from 1,400 pound cows to 1,100 pound cows, you immediately gain a 20% efficiency in stocking rate. You can run 20% more cattle and not really have too much of weaning weight. Clearly your weaning weight would go down, but there's actually a pretty weak correlation with cow size and weaning weight. I forget what the number is. And I think it's pretty easy to focus on cow size, but I think both Roger and Rocco had a lot of good words of wisdom, where it's just a function of your management, a function of your environment, which is also your management of really, we just allow Mother Nature to select for what cow is the right size. And sometimes it's surprising. Sometimes it makes sense. And really, when I first came home, I was really hard on, my philosophy was to cull hard on cows. I've since swapped big time. I think if you want to make genetic advancement in a cow herd, a good cow, a really good cow would have 7 to 9 calves in her lifetime. I forget what the average number of calves a cow has that they share at ranching for profit, 3 calves. Whereas a good bull will sire 240 calves. So your leverage point is on the bull side. For your cows, of course, this is coming from a commercial guy. If your cows are bringing a calf in every year, a lot like just echoing what everyone else said, if it's within that average, within the acceptable bell curve, I think is what Jim said earlier, which I agree with, then she's doing her job. Really, that lever for genetic advancement is on bulls. So all of our focus is on bulls. And what I didn't talk about is how we select our bulls. There's a number of different criteria, but really the main criteria that we use is the hip height to individual weight, which is so their meat to bone ratio, which has a high correlation with early sexual maturity or fertility, which also has a high correlation with doability on grass, which is why it's applicable to us and what we're looking for in genetics and being able to do what Johann Zeitzman talks about, which cow's dual purpose role is to improve the ground that she's grazing on, 1, and 2, to efficiently convert grass into beef, which is a tall ask. And that's, anyway, I feel like I'm rambling on, but my point is we focus on bulls more so than we focus on our cow selection criteria.
No, thank you, Cooper. That was very good. Yeah, thank you to the whole group. We will be here same time next week. Next month. Yeah, we could be here next week too if you want, but it must be getting late. I didn't even know if I was off mute or not, but I guess I was. I really want to thank the panelists that volunteered to lead this conversation. And we've got several others that were there as backups, but we'll swap it over to you guys to lead the next one next month. And we ended up, Holly was chewing on me over here because we were talking about bulls tonight and there was too much cow talk. So we'll have to swap that over and you guys can talk a little bit about bulls next time too, and it'll be a good trade. And I won't be in trouble. So in a month, we'll talk about cows, and in a couple weeks, hopefully we'll have this recording available. We hope to see you all back here next month. 24th. And yeah, let us know if you're interested in that marketing school. I think there's a lot of good knowledge to be had there and some unique information. So thank you all and have a wonderful night.
Thank you all.